We will start the third session on the future of ROK-US military alliance. And the previous two sessions, we already discussed on the international environment and also the Korean Peninsula situations based on two discussions. Our final and concluding presentations and comments and discussion will focus on the future of ROK-US military alliance. It seems that everybody agrees that ROK and US enjoy the excellent period of alliance between two powers. However, it seems that there might be several factors we should consider to discuss the future of Korea-US alliance. As we already briefly discussed in the two previous sessions, first factor might be the new emerging architecture of East Asian regional order, in parallel with the rapidly rise of China. And second factor, it might be the unstable relations between South and North Korea with the introduction of new leadership of John Kim. And third factor might be the financial deficit of the United States, which will cause some kind of the inevitable reduction of military expenses in the upcoming several years. After having two presentations on the future of ROK-US alliance from Korean perspective and also the US perspective, and after that we will have comments from seven participants. I would like to invite, we do have the three presentations. First presentation will be done by Dr. Abraham Denmark, Fellow of the CNES, and second presentation will be made by Dr. Tuyeon Cha, Research Fellow of the KAIDA, Korea Institute for Defense Analysis, and final and third presentation will be done by Mr. Marcus Galauskas, Chief of the Strategy Division, United States First Korea. And we also have seven prominent commentators: Victor Cha, Namun Cho, Senior Fellow of the KAIDA, Patrick Cronin, Senior Advisor of the CNES, and Jae-bong Ham, Director of the ASEAN Institute for Policy Studies, Mr. Jin-Hao Hwang, Congressman of the Grand National Party, and Professor Song Ho Shin, Professor of Seoul National University, and Mr. Yong-won Yu, Military Professional Journalist of the Joseon Ilbo. I'd like to invite as a first presenters Dr. Abraham Denmark on the issue of adapting the alliance for the future challenges. Dr. Denmark.
Again, I'd like to thank EAI and Pyeongtaek for hosting this conference. I'll be speaking on adapting the alliance to 21st century challenges. My comments today are taken from a report that CNAS will be releasing on Friday at an event with KAIDA. So this is a bit of a sneak preview for you all. So I have 5 main points that I want to cover. But since my center was founded by Secretary Kurt Campbell, in his finest traditions, if you look at the points I actually make, there'll be a lot more than 5. and also probably start off with something that's not directly related. My wife sent me an email this morning. She just read the study that comes out on Friday and said, "You missed the most important issue in the US-ROK alliance." Now, my wife doesn't know anything about the alliance or Korea or anything, but what she does know something about is the Cleveland Indians. And she said that I need to talk about the importance of Sin Suu Kyu staying with the Cleveland Indians next year. And I didn't address it in the study, so my first point is that Sin Suu Kyu needs to stay in Cleveland. But seriously, on the most important point, my first point here, is that America's future is in East Asia, both economically, demographically, and militarily. The future balance of global power for the 21st century is going to be in East Asia. China is a big part of it. China's rise is a big part of it, but it's not the entire story. If you look at demographics, India is set to overtake China as the world's most populous country. Economically, the region has experienced a vast economic rise, while China's has been the fastest and largest. You can see that rise percolating throughout the region. And militarily, while China also has seen a significant rise in its military capabilities, we've seen that rise extend throughout the region. India, Indonesia, Malaysia, all have been significantly increasing their defense budgets in recent years. So America's future is in East Asia. My second point is that Korea is at the region's center, both literally on a map and figuratively. If you look to the west of Korea, you'll see China, which will, as Victor Cha talked about this morning, will define the dynamics of international politics in the 21st century, whether it's offensive realism, defensive realism, or neoliberalism. To Korea's north is a threat from North Korea, the greatest threat to the region's continued stability and prosperity. To the south is the Indian Ocean and the South China Sea. My colleague Robert Kaplan wrote in his recent book that the South China Sea and Indian Ocean will be as important to international security in the 21st century as the Mediterranean was in the 19th and 20th centuries. And finally, to the east, to Korea's east, is the United States. Its ally, but also we see a power that is increasing, whose power is increasingly constrained, both by rising deficits, which will challenge our ability to have large defense budgets, politically, a polity that is tired of warfare since the invasion of Afghanistan and Iraq, and more broadly, the rise of the rest and the relative decline of American military power compared to rising countries, especially in East Asia. Some examples, especially of an America increasingly tired of conflict. A 2010 survey of American public opinion published by the Chicago Center on Global Affairs found that 91% of Americans said that the United States should focus on fixing problems at home rather than fixing problems abroad, 91%. 71% of Americans said that the United States should do its share to solve international problems, but with the cooperation of other countries. And this actually translated to issues specifically focused on the Korean Peninsula in a paper that Victor Cha co-authored on the same study, found that 56% of Americans oppose America's unilateral defense of South Korea should the North invade. But that figure flips to 61% of Americans supporting American participating in the defense of South Korea as part of a multinational effort. So the uptake of those points is that the future of Asia is in our hands, both America's and Korea's hands. And that goes to my third point, which is that Korea must accept these historical challenges. And I'm going to focus on the military aspect of what that means when it comes to Korea accepting these challenges. As we've discussed throughout the day today, South Korea is facing a tremendously diverse set of security challenges, from North Korean attack to North Korean limited warfare, to a collapse of North Korea, and over the long term, the challenge of China and global challenges such as the security of the global commons. Yet, South Korea is a small country and cannot possibly be expected to address all these challenges on its own. And this is why the alliance is going to be so important. That it's through this alliance that together we can address these many challenges. And the key, I think, for both Washington and Seoul is identifying what our priorities are, what we need to focus on, and who needs to do what based on our unique capabilities and our unique interests and challenges. One issue, though, that I think is at the center of all of this, when thinking about what does the ROK need, in discussion that will happen later on in this panel, is that South Korea's history of procurement, of military procurement, is somewhat ad hoc and not driven by a degree of planning and strategic planning that would be ideal. So, for example, we've seen in recent months, after the sinking of the Chonan, we saw many cries coming out from South Korea, the need to invest in naval capabilities, Navy, 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 until the attack on Yongpyong Island. Then it was Marine Corps and turning those islands into island fortresses, and proposals to spend billions of dollars on these immediate needs. But it's always following the attack, trying to respond to the attack, to a weakness that an attack identified, and throwing billions of dollars at these challenges. And while the Ministry of Defense has a very robust effort on contingency planning and looking at future challenges, we still need to see a closer link between the thinking about contingencies and actual need for capabilities, and starting to think about and plan about strategically using things such as modeling and simulation, et cetera. So in our paper, looking at all these various challenges, one of our conclusions that I'll discuss in a bit here, we can go into later if we need, is the need for an adaptable force posture. As Patrick mentioned earlier, human beings, let alone strategists, are very bad at predicting the future and identifying what we'll actually need in 10, 15, and 20 years. If in 1998 someone would have told Americans that we're going to be spending 9, 10 years in occupying Iraq and Afghanistan, you would have been laughed out of the room. But that's the reality that happened. So we're not going to know exactly what kind of capabilities we're going to need. So the focus for the Korean military, especially given the small size of the country and the large size of the challenges that you'll be facing, is a need for what I call an adaptable force posture. Looking at the key capabilities that would be applicable across the broadest set of contingencies. And this is something that needs to be done across ground, air, naval, and especially C4ISR capabilities. Looking at what specifically do we need that can be used in the widest variety of contingencies. An important part of that is building experience in these key capabilities that will be needed. Following the artillery shelling on Yongpyong Island, there was a discussion in the National Assembly that the Korean military is not experienced enough, that they're not used to being in these sort of combat situations. And one of the things that I look at, we talk about it in this report that comes out on Friday, is that there is an opportunity to build experience in some of the key capabilities that the ROK may need in certain contingencies and scenarios. And this addresses, to me, a question that was asked earlier in today's conference, which is why should Korea contribute to global issues, to global security challenges, such as peacekeeping, stability operations, humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, and securing the global commons. And I point to building experience in key capabilities, building skills in those capabilities, in certain operations, peacekeeping operations, stability operations, humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, bear remarkable similarities to some of the kinds of skills and capabilities that would be necessary should there be a collapse in North Korea. From securing armed populations to providing food and medical assistance in areas without much infrastructure to speak of, is very similar in some humanitarian assistance and stability operations as it would be potentially in a collapsed North Korea. Korea does send forces, obviously, to Afghanistan, to Iraq, around the world in peacekeeping operations, but these forces are rather small and put in relatively, in areas that don't see the full brunt of some of these stability operations that we've seen. So for example, in Iraq and Afghanistan, Korean forces have generally tended to stay in areas that are relatively stable. I would encourage that the Korean military look to these global operations not as a way to contribute to, not only as a way to contribute to the international system or to repay debts because of the Korean War, but as an opportunity to build experience within the ROK military and spread the lessons learned from those operations throughout the force in ways that could contribute to operations closer to home. My fourth point is that beyond North Korea, obviously North Korea is the biggest challenge that the ROK is going to be facing, but beyond North Korea, China needs to be a more outward and more focused element of the U.S. ROK alliance. I would posit that managing China's rise should be a fundamental element of the alliance, both as a vehicle to engage the PLA with focusing on dialogue and soft security cooperation, but also preparing for and building the capability to deter against potential Chinese aggression or coercion over the long term. My fifth point is that the United States and South Korea need to prepare not only for unification and the challenges that we talked about in the last panel, but I would argue that we need to start talking about post-unification. That we need to start identifying what are the principles that we want to see in a unified Korea that we can share both within the alliance and talk about more broadly. And I would propose a few of shared goals for a unified Korean Peninsula. A Korea that is democratic, independent, responsible player in the international system, and nuclear free. I would also posit that one of the key principles would be that redeveloping the North is not only the responsibility of South Korea, not only the responsibility of the alliance, but really responsibility of the entire world. I also think that we need to start talking about the role of the alliance and the purpose of the alliance post-unification, and start laying the groundwork for what the alliance will play. Obviously, the status of American forces in the Korean Peninsula post-unification will be up to the decisions of the unified government, but I think it's important that we start talking about that now, and start building not only within the government, but within the minds of the Korean people, an idea for what role the U.S. ROK alliance will play in the future. Now finally, this is probably beyond my fifth point, I think it's especially important to talk about the role of building popular support for the alliance, not only within the government, but also within the minds of the Korean people, especially since this conference is being sponsored by Pyeongtaek City. It's important to talk about and think about the role of media in the alliance. We've seen around the world and around the region American bases becoming the focus of animosity within the local populations. This is true. This has unfortunately happened around the world, and we have a chance to in some ways start fresh with the move of American forces through Korea, and thinking ahead about how we can turn American bases in Pyeongtaek and elsewhere into centers for economic development and interaction between the U.S. forces and the Korean people. We can lay that groundwork now, and should be laying that groundwork now. It's especially important in the 21st century, when democracy and technology are combining into a very difficult political environment in which local issues can easily and quickly explode into national controversies in a way that they hadn't before. So really dealing with the population is not only a question of dealing with the people who live in the neighborhood around the bases in Pyeongtaek and elsewhere, but really dealing with how the U.S. military is perceived throughout Korea. And this was really the foundation for building long-term support for the alliance, is building that support from the ground up. So those are the main points. Again, I will be releasing the full report on Friday, so we can go into some of these issues in more depth in the Q&A if you like. But also I'd like to reiterate that since Chu is a very good player, we need to keep him in Cleveland. And with that, thank you very much.
It's my great pleasure and honor to meet and discuss with prominent scholars and experts. And I would like to present my appreciation to give me such a good opportunity to the EAI and CNAS. It would be better to do my presentation by Korean because some of the concept is so crucial. It's very important to avoid even small misunderstanding. 제가 발표할 오늘 제목을 영문으로 잡아봤는데요. 굳이 아마 한국어로 직역하면 전략동맹에서의 한국군, 그리고 그 부제라는 것은 진정한 전략적 파트너가 되기 위한 진정한 전략적 파트너를 향한 진화를 위해서 뭐 이런 것이 될 겁니다. 여기서 Real Strategic Partner라는 표현을 썼던 가장 큰 이유는 아마 아직 한국군이 미국과의 진정한 전략적인 동반자 관계를 형성하기 위해서 넘어야 될 산이 많다라는 거고요. 또 거꾸로 미국 측도 현실치에서 한국에 대해서 가지고 있는 과도한 기대라든가 이런 것 자체를 좀 조정하는 것이 필요하다라는 이중적인 의미를 지니고 있다고 봐주시면 되겠습니다. 제 발표 내용은 크게 지금 5가지 부분으로 되어 있는데요. 첫 번째는 2000년대 중후반 이후에 한미가 추구하고 있는 새로운 동맹에서의 도전 요인과 그리고 기회 요인을 한번 살펴보고요. 이러한 인식의 연장선상에서 그동안 한미가 끊임없이 미래 동맹으로의 발전을 모색을 해왔고 또 여러 번의 정상회담을 통한 공동성명에서 천명을 해왔지만 여전히 답이 주어지지 않고 있는 여백으로 남아있는 퀘스천들이 뭐가 있는가에 대해서 한번 살펴보는 게 중요하다고 봤습니다. 그래서 이러한 질문들을 중심으로 해서 정말 Strategic Alliance, 전략 동맹이라는 것이 되기 위해서는 뭘 해야 하는가에 대해서 아마 한국의 입장에서 질문을 던져볼 것이고요. 네 번째는 그런 면에서 과연 현재의 한국군이 충분히 준비되어 있는가. 다시 말해서 Strategic Alliance 내에서 정말 전략적인 동반자가 될 준비가 되어 있는가를 한번 살펴보는 게 될 것이고요. 마지막에는 이를 통해서 유명한 한미연합군사령부의 9호고 이것이 2015년으로 예정되어 있는 전시작전 통제권 전환 이후에도 그대로 적용이 되겠지만 우리가 영원히 함께 가기 위한 그러기 위한 길은 무엇이 있겠는가를 살펴보게 되겠습니다. 잘 아시는 바와 같이요. 사실은 한미동맹이 미래에 걸맞는 발전을 해야 된다는 논의가 나온 거는 근래 일은 아닙니다. 이미 1990년대 초반에 이른바 탈냉전 시대가 전개되기 시작하면서부터 비록 정부 간 대화는 아니었지만 1993년에서 94년 사이에 한국국방연구원과 미국 랜드 코퍼레이션 사이에서 미래 동맹에 대한 공동 연구가 진행된 바가 있었고요. 이 이후에 공식적인 대화체는 아니지만은 한국과 미국의 양측 국방부의 국장급 대화가 또 간간히 시도가 됐습니다. 그러다가 2000년대 중반에 들어서면서부터 본격적으로 한미동맹의 미래를 위한 각종 이슈들을 함께 토론하고 또 문제들을 해결해 나가는 대화체로서 2003년에서 2004년 사이에 FOTA, FOTA죠. 이거는 Future of the Alliance의 당시의 약자였습니다만 이것이 개최가 된 바가 있고 이게 첫 번째 공식적인 협의체일 겁니다. 이걸 통해서 주한미 2사단의 한강 이남 이동을 포함한 전반적인 주한미군 기지 재편이 합의가 됐고요. 또 한반도 방위와 관련된 10대 임무의 전환과 같은 굵직한 사안들이 합의가 됐고 이어서 이제 FOTA 지금도 계속되고 있습니다만 FOTA에 뒤이은 SPI에서 계속적으로 동맹 발전을 위한 협의가 이루어지고 있습니다. 다만 2000년대 중반에 한미동맹의 미래동맹을 위한 조정 과정이 진행되는 과정에서는 서로가 외형적인 표정 관리에는 어느 정도 성공을 했지만 사실은 당시 언론에도 보도되고 했지만은 동맹 간의 어떤 신뢰의 위기라든가 새로운 동맹의 미래를 보는 데 있어서 적지 않은 그 이견들이 보였던 것도 사실이고요. 그래서 2008년에 이명박 정부가 들어서면서 대통령께서 동맹의 복원이라는 것을 가장 중요한 외교안보 부분에 역점적인 과제로 말씀을 하셨고 실질적으로 아마 한국의 외교안보 정책에서 가장 높은 우선순위에 두어진 것이 미국과의 굳건한 동맹관계 유지 그리고 미래지향적인 동맹관계의 발전일 겁니다. 이에는 부시 대통령과 이명박 대통령 간의 관계도 그렇고 지금의 오바마 대통령과의 관계도 그렇고 양자 간의 개인적인 어떤 이 우애라든가 아니면 우정 같은 것도 상당히 중요한 촉매제 역할을 했다고 생각이 되고요. 그런 면에서 이명박 정부 들어선 이후에 동맹관계라는 것이 일부에서 평가하기에는 60년이 가까워지는 동맹사에서 유례없는 밀월관계를 과시한다라고도 지금 얘기가 되고 있죠. 실질적으로 그 근거로 나오고 있는 것이 2009년에 동맹에 대한 미래동맹 비전 공동선언이 있었고요. 또 이 미래동맹 비전 공동선언 안에서 이 북한의 대량 살상무기 위협에 대응한 미국의 확장 억제 (Extended Deterrence) 공약이 있었고요. 또 금년에는 결국 한국 국내의 안보 우려를 감안을 해서 원래 2012년으로 합의되었던 전시작전 통제권의 그 이양 시기 역시 2015년으로 조정이 됐습니다. 근데 여기서 우리가 하나 이 문제의식을 가져야 될 것은 근데 분명히 여건은 좋은데 동맹이 앞으로 맞닥뜨려야 될 이 위협들이라든가 아니면 관리해야 될 문제들은 점점 더 복잡해지고 오히려 또 어떤 면에서는 해결하기가 갈수록 더 어려워지는 속성이 있다는 것인데요. 대표적인 것이 얼마 전에 연평도 포격에서도 나오고 있지만은 전통적인 북한의 재래적인 위협하고 또 대량 살상무기 위협이 결합되면서 전혀 다른 형태의 대응 필요성을 지금 만들어내고 있다라는 것이고요. 다시 말해서 과거에 한 2000년대 초반에 와서 북한의 핵 문제라든가 대량 살상 무기만 해결을 하면 될 것이다라고 얘기를 했는데 이제는 국지도발 위협까지 관리를 해야 되는 시대가 됐고요. 또 이것뿐만 아니라 요즘 심심치 않게 나오고 있는 북한의 불안정 사태를 어떻게 관리할 것인가 하는 과제도 떠오르고요. 지금 아마 저희 앞서 미국 측도 발표를 했지만은 지역 차원의 어떤 평화 재건 활동이라든가 아니면은 이 테러라든가 비확산 문제 이와 같은 지역적이고 아니면 그 세계적인 차원에서의 재래적인 것과는 다른 위협들을 관리하는 것도 새로운 동맹의 숙제로 떠오르게 됐습니다. 네, 이렇게 많은 이 챌린지들이 있는데도 불구하고 사실은 조금 더 현재 굉장히 유례없이 좋다라는 동맹관계 이면을 들여다보면 몇 가지 아직도 해결되지 않은 숙제들이 있다라는 겁니다. 제일 첫 번째가 과연 우리가 미래를 향한 21세기형 전략동맹체제 (Strategic Alliance를) 지금 발전시켜 나가겠다라고 얘기를 하고 있는데 사실은 이 얘기가 나온 게 보통 2000년대 중반이거든요. 엄밀하게 얘기해서 수사의 표현, 레토릭에 있어서 좀 틀릴 뿐이지 기본적으로 한미가 추구했던 개념이라는 것은 과거 정부의 포괄적, 역동적, 호혜적 동맹이나 그 다음에 전략 동맹이나 거의 비슷할 겁니다. 근데 이제는 이런 총론의 문제들, 그 다음에 수사적인 어법의 문제가 아니라 보다 강론의 문제들이 나와야 됨에도 불구하고 아직은 계속 이것이 걸음마 단계로 가고 있다는 것은 결국 어딘가 특히 무엇이 전략적인 스트래테직 얼라이언스인가에 대한 우리가 잠재적인 인식상의 갭이 있는 게 아니냐. 제가 예를 들어 보면 아마 스트래테직 얼라이언스 얘기할 때 한국인들의 프레퍼런스 선호라는 것은 여전히 21세기에도 한미 동맹이 지속된다. 그것은 바로 한반도 방어를 위한 동맹이 지속된다라는 의미겠고요. 아마 미국이 생각하는 스트래티지의 의미는 조금 더 아마 다를 수가 있을 겁니다. 아까 카이다하고 시너스 간의 공동 연구에서도 이미 시사가 됐지만은요. 이런 갭을 과연 줄였냐 하는 것이고요. 그리고 누가 보더라도 전략 동맹이라는 것이 어떤 동맹이구나. 마치 1996년에 미일 신안보 공동선언이 나오고 그 이후에 미일 안보협력 가이드라인이 나왔을 때 대부분의 사람들이 이제 미일 동맹이라는 것은 단순히 일본을 보호하기 위한 것이 아니라 양자가 협력을 해서 결국 지역과 세계로 나가는 동맹이구나를 알아챘던 것처럼 우리가 전략 동맹이라는 개념 안에 정말 양측이 합의된 동맹의 코즈 데이라든가 임무라든가 아니면 역할 분담이라는 것을 발전시켜 왔느냐를 한번 여기에 대한 대답을 한번 구할 필요가 있다라는 것이고요. 그 다음에 두 번째는 한반도 방위, 그 다음에 지역하고 세계 방위에 있어서 일부의 역할 분담 얘기가 나오기는 했지만, 그리고 논의되기는 했지만, 진짜 여기에 대해서 과연 한미가 어떤 역할들을 서로 주도적으로 해나갈 것인가, 아니면은 지원 받아서 해나갈 것인가, 이런 개념들, 구체적인 개념들에 대해서 정말로 확실한 합의가 이루어진 것이냐 하는 거에 대해서, 또 정말 한반도를 뛰어넘는 동맹에 대해서 그럼 한국의 국내는 완전히 동의를 한 것이고, 또 누군가 이것이 불가피한 추세라고 인식을 정말 하고 있는 것이냐 하는 거에 대해서도 한번 의문을 던져봐야 될 것이고요. 그 다음에 장기적인 주한미군의 주둔 규모라든가 기지 체계 자체도 한번 여기에 대해서도 과연 답이 확실히 주어져 있냐도 생각을 해봐야 된다는 것이죠. 다시 말해서 통일 후까지를 생각한 장기적인 주한미군의 규모 문제라든가, 그 다음에 주한미군이 보다 융통성 있는 어떤 전력 관리를, 전력 운용을 해나가는 그 수준이라든가 아니면은 범위에 대해서도 확실한 합의가 이루어져 있는가, 또 미래 한반도의 기지를 이용해서 동맹이 확장된 역할을 해나가는 가운데 한국 내에서 일부 우려가 제기되고 있는 바로 연루, 인트레먼트에 대한 두려움이 근본적으로 해소가 되었는가도 한번 돌아볼 필요가 있고요. 가장 제가 여기서 강조하고 싶은 것은 아무리 프렌드십을 중심으로 한 관계라고 얘기하지만 근본적으로 동맹도 서로 거래를 하는 관계라는 겁니다. 다시 말해서 한쪽이 명분을 준다면 다른 한쪽은 실리를 준다든가, 모든 동맹 관계는 바로 이런 거래 관계 속에서 진화가 되어 왔고요. 이런 동맹 관계의 거래 관계 속에서, 동맹의 거래 관계 속에서 어느 한쪽이 지나치게 희생을 한다든가 손해를 본다라는 느낌이죠. 다시 말해서 거래 비용, 트랜잭션 코스트가 한쪽이 너무 커지게 되면 반드시 그 동맹은 위기라든가 아니면 재조정 과정에 돌입하게 되더라는 얘기죠. 대표적인 것이 그 전작권 논쟁 과정에서도 일부 나왔지만, 이양 논쟁 과정에서 나왔지만은 한국이 바라는 것은 미국에 보다 신뢰성 있는 안보 공약일 것이고요. 반면에 미국 일부이긴 하지만 미국에서 볼 경우에는 이것이 아직도 아마 G20의 일원이 됐고 상당한 경제 발전을 했다 그러나 한국이 밴드웨거닝의 심리를 버리지, 편승의 심리를 버리지 못한 게 하느냐 하는 시각이 나올 수도 있을 것이고요. 그리고 또 당장 이제 직접적인 돈의 문제에 있어서는 어떤 것이 정말 합리적인 수준에서의 이 버든 쉐어링, 방위비 분담 문제냐 하는 거에 대한 그 거래 관계도 아직 명백하게 정립이 됐다고 볼 수는 없겠죠. 그리고 양측이 서로를 바라보는, 서로 기대되는 역할에 대해서도 완전한 합의를 이뤘다고 보기는 힘들 겁니다. 또 사실 한국이 나중에 한반도 방위의 이외의 부가적인 어떤 역할을 지역이나 세계 차원에서 담당해 나갈 때 과연 어떤 수준의 어떤 역할을 할 것이냐에 대한 것도 여전히 숙제로 남아있다라고 볼 수가 있겠죠. 또 2015년까지로 합의가 되기는 했지만은 좀 보다 연장하기로 합의가 되긴 했지만은 정작 더 중요한 것은 그 전작권 이양이 된 이후에 새로운 지휘관계, 작전협력관계를 어떻게 적용하느냐, 이것도 대단한 숙제거리가 될 수밖에 없습니다. 다시 말해서 전략적인, 전술적인, 그리고 작전적인 모든 차원에서 어떤 것이 가장 합리적인 이 협력을 보장하느냐에 대한 제도적인 보완이 지속적으로 이루어져야 될 것이고요. 근본적으로 2000년대 중반부터 진행됐던 한미 간의 전자권 협의에는 결정적으로 빠진 게 있습니다. 어떻게 보면 논리적인 모순이라고도 볼 수가 있는 거죠. 동맹이 누구나 봐도 중장기적으로는 한반도를 벗어난 협력을 하겠다라고 얘기했던 동맹에서 지휘관계 문제만 유독 한반도 방위에 고착되어 있다는 거죠. 지금 합의되어 있는 것 자체는. 정말 미래지향적인 동맹에서의 지휘관계라면 단순히 한반도 방위에 대한 작전 협력뿐만 아니라 지역 세계 질서 차원에서의 어떠한 지휘관계라든가 작전 협력이 이루어져야 될 것인가에 대해서도 이제는 답을 구할 때가 됐다라고 봅니다. 그런 면에서 과연 전략동맹으로의 발전을 위해서 그럼 이 답을 구하는 차원에서 가장 우선적으로 중점을 둬야 될 것은 무엇이냐라고 얘기할 때는요, 결국은 새로운 동맹이라는 것이 무엇인가에 대한 분명한 개념화가 있어야 될 것이고요. 그러기 때문에 새로운 전략동맹은 전통적인 동맹과는 무엇이 다르고 일반적으로 우리가 동맹을 규정짓는 구체적인 가치와 컨셉들이 뭔가에 대해서 이제는 합의가 돼야 되겠고요. 또 결국은 이건 한미 모두가 걱정을 해봐야 되는 것이 결국 여전히 한국 내에서 한미 동맹의 가장 큰 존재 의의는 북한으로부터의 전쟁 위협이라는 것을 방어하거나 억제하는 것인데도 불구하고 미래에 이것이 과연 없어졌을 때 이게 1990년대 이후에 탈냉전 시대부터 끊임없이 한미동맹의 숙제로 떠오른 건데요. 이게 없어졌을 때 과연 미군의 주둔과 주한미군의 주둔과 그 한국 내에 있는 베이스를 이용하는 그 문제에 대해서 어떻게 한국인들을 설득시킬 수 있을 것이냐 하는 문제도 보다 명확하게 규정이 돼야 된다는 것이고요. 그러기 위해서는 지금 현재는 북한이라는 공통의 적을 통해서 묶여 있지만 장기적으로 북한의 위협이 감소되거나 사라졌을 때 대처해야 될 공통의 위협이란 게 뭐냐, 트랙 퍼셉션이 뭐냐에 대해서도 분명한 합의가 있어야 되겠고요. 이건 이미 2000년대 중반에 한미 간의 미묘한 이 견해차를 보이기도 한 부분입니다만은 그렇기 때문에 무엇보다 한미 간에 끊임없이 정기적인 위협 판단에 대한 공유된 위협 판단이 있어야 될 것이고요. 그리고 만약에 그런 퍼셉션의 갭이 존재한다면 이것을 메우기 위한 노력도 있어야 될 것이고요. 그 다음에 결국은 양국 정보뿐만 아니라 이것이 동맹의 진화와 관련된 양측의 여러 주도층들 간의 긴밀한 어떤 네트워크가 공통인식이 있어야 될 거라고 생각합니다. 그런 다음에는 결과적으로 동맹 관계에서 양측이 가지고 있는 일종의 저는 신화라고 표현을 했는데요. 이것들을 깨나가는 작업, 다시 말해서 양측 기대 수준의 합리화죠. 아마 미국의 입장에서 볼 때는 밴드웨건잉이라고 느끼겠지만 한국의 입장에서는 결국은 경제 성장이라든가 건전한 경제 복지 문제 어느 하나도 쉽게 현재 한국의 위치에서는 포기할 수가 없는 것이거든요. 그렇기 때문에 미국의 입장에서는 과거에 50여 년의 기여에 당연히 상응하는 기대를 하고 있다고 생각할 수는 있지만 여전히 한국의 현실 면에서 과도한 것일 수도 있고요. 또 우리가 미국에 대해서 기대하는 신뢰성 있는 안보 공약에 요구를 하는 것 자체도 현재의 미국의 사정을 너무 생각 안 하고 우리 이익만 생각하는 게 분명히 될 수 있는 부분도 있다라는 거죠. 이걸 한번 판단을 해봐야 될 것이라는 것이고요. 또 근본적으로 미국이 세계 전략을 추진하는 방향은 먼저 세계를 보고 지역을 보고 한반도를 보는 걸 겁니다. 반면에 한국의 입장에서는 한반도 지역 세계 차원으로의 전략적 시각을 가질 수밖에 없는데 이걸 어떻게 어드저스트 하느냐의 문제가 있을 것이고요. 보다 작전적인 측면에서는 계속적으로 인터오퍼러블리티, 상호 운용성을 높이는 문제도 굉장히 중요한 문제고요. 특히 갈수록 미래 전장에서 합동성이 강화돼가는 추세에서 그럼 한미 양국군 간의 동맹 체계 내에서의 합동성은 어떻게 제고할 거냐, 이거 자체도 분명히 전략 동맹 내에서는 중요한 과제가 될 거라는 것이고요. 그런 면에서 우리가 한번 한미 동맹의 전략적인 파트너로서의 한국군이 제대로 준비되어 있느냐 하는 거에 대한 한번 자문을 던져볼 필요가 있다는 건데요. 여전히 여기에 대해서 만족할 만한 만점짜리 점수를 줄 수 없다라고 보는 가장 큰 까닭은 우리가 처음에 국방개혁을 시작했을 때의 최종 목표에 정말 도달할 수 있는가에 대한 가능성, 이게 예산의 문제도 있고요. 그 다음에 북한으로부터 떠오른 새로운 어떤 위협의 소요도 있고 또 결국은 한국의 국방 개혁이라는 것 자체가 현존하는 위협으로부터 눈을 돌리고 미래에만 집착할 수도 없는 노릇이거든요. 이렇게 할 때 결국 비핵화가 늦어졌다거나 아니면은 북한의 비대칭 전력이 여전히 존재하는 상황 하에서 국방 개혁이라는 문제를 어떻게 봐야 될 것이냐에 대한 고민은 계속될 수밖에 없다는 것이고요. 그리고 상당히 중요하고 발전시키려고 노력을 하고 있지만 여전히 한국군에 있어서 몇 가지 취약점이 있다라는 거는 뭐 우리도 솔직히 여기서는 한번 생각을 해봐야 된다는 것이죠. 하나는 전략적인 기획의 문제라든가 결국은 한반도뿐만 아니라 지역이나 세계 차원을 보는, 그래서 한국군이 어떤 역할을 할 것인가에 대한 전략적인 기획이라든가 아니면은 정보 능력 아니면 합동성 능력, 그리고 단순히 군뿐만 아니라 군과 관련된 안보와 관련된 각종 부처들의 역량을 한꺼번에 엮는 인터에이전시 커퍼레이션의 능력이죠. 다시 말해 유관기관 협력의 능력이고요. 또 NCW라는 게 새로운 개념으로 나왔지만 우리한테 사실 너무 비싼 개념이기도 하거든요. 이걸 어떻게 한국적 실정에 맞게 바꾸느냐의 문제도 아직은 준비가 그렇게 잘 돼 있지만은 않다라는 것이고요. 무엇보다 지금 한국군이 절실하게 구해야 될 것은 어떻게 싸울 거냐 하는 거죠. 이건 어떻게 보면 하드웨어를 구하는 것보다 훨씬 더 중요한 겁니다. 어떻게 싸울 거냐가 나와야 동맹 차원에서 어떻게 협력할까가 나온다는 거죠. 다시 말해서 업컨 트랜스포 이후에 한국이 만약에 한반도 방위를 정말 그 리딩이라는 표현에서의 주도를 쓰든 서포티드라는 표현에서의 주도라는 걸 그걸 한국어로 주도라고 번역을 하던 간에 결국 그 시대에 그러면 북한의 위협에 대해서는 어떻게 싸울 건가? 그리고 우리는 어떤 면에서 몇 퍼센트, 어떤 전력을 중심으로 해서 주도적인 위치를 갖고 미국에 대해서 구체적으로 어떤 부분을 도와달라고 요구할 것인가에 대한 개념이 확실하게 서 있는가를 한번 봐야 될 것이고요. 무조건 첨단 전력만이 좋은 거냐? 어느 정도의 하이로 믹스가 가장 적정해 한국군 전력 구성 빈가에 대해서도 한번 고민을 해봐야 된다는 것이고요. 이걸 바탕으로 해서 미국한테 이걸 지원해 줬으면 좋겠다 이면은 우리가 정말 말 그대로 따옴표 리딩 하겠다라고 하는 얘기가 컨셉이 나와야 되는데 아직 이 부분들 자체도 많은 과제로 남아있는 것 같다는 것이죠. 그렇기 때문에 사실은 현재 한국군의 케이퍼빌리티 면에서 오히려 더 많은 노력을 기울여야 될 것은 하드웨어, 특정한 무기의 획득 아니면 구매보다는 마인드 자체와 그 다음에 소프트웨어를 트랜스폼 시켜나가는 끊임없는 노력이 필요하다고 볼 수가 있고요. 이걸 바탕으로 할 때 결과적으로는 일단 한국 자체의 방위 능력이라는 것이 증가되어야 된다는 걸 두말할 필요가 없을 겁니다. 실질적으로 이 동맹의 이론도 있고 국제정치 이론에도 있지만은 사실은 자주국방 능력 자체가 발전되면 발전될수록 오히려 동맹에 대한 필요성은 떨어지거든요. 근데 한국 같은 경우는 굉장히 이건 특이한 케이스라고 볼 수가 있습니다. 1970년대에 당시 정부 하에서 됐던 자주국방도 그렇고 지금의 자체 방위적 노력 자체도 이건 동맹 구조 내에서 편승을 하지 않겠다라는 동맹 파트너에 대한 하나의 협력의 표시지 이게 우리 능력으로 어떻게 하는 건 아니라는 거에 대한 우리 능력만으로 어떻게 하는 건 아니라는 거에 대한 분명한 합의는 있어야 될 것이고요. 그렇기 때문에 아마 과도한 의존의 탈피란 면으로 이해가 돼야 되는 것이 아니냐 하는 겁니다. 그리고 아까도 말씀드렸지만은 전략이라든가 작전이라든가 그 다음에 전략 전술 작전 모든 면에서 한국 자체의 기획 능력이 확장이 돼야 될 것이고요. 그리고 연구 개발이라든가 한국 자체의 방산 기술력을 확장하는 작업도 매우 중요한 걸 겁니다. 마찬가지로는 미국과의 이 동맹 관계를 계속적으로 환경 변화에 맞게 트랜스포밍 변환시켜 나가는 것도 매우 중요한 것이고요. 끊임없는 고민을 가지고 이 컨셉과의 정말 각 개념들과의 치열한 싸움을 시작해야 되는 시기가 아닌가. 이제는 더 이상 그냥 수사적으로 보여주는 우리는 친하다가 아니라 우리는 구체적으로 어떻기 때문에 친하고 앞으로도 친해질 수밖에 없을 거라는 것을 이제는 고민해 봐야 되는 때가 아닌가 생각이 되고요. 마지막으로 그렇기 때문에 제가 아까 말씀드린 정말 미래의 거래 관계를 트랜잭션을 만들어 나간다는 의미에서 보다 그동안은 사실은 좀 골치 아픈 문제라고 생각을 해서 나중에 얘기하자라는 쪽으로 또는 좀 그 공론화를 꺼려했던 문제들에 대해서도 이제 한미가 본격적으로 논의를 시작돼야 될 때가 아닌가 생각을 합니다. 첫 번째는 일단 이 지역이라든가 세계 차원에서의 한국군의 보다 적극적인 역할의 문제라든가 아니면 과연 어떤 것이 서로 괜히 지금 우리는 할 만큼 한국은 다 하고 있다라고 얘기하고 미국은 다른 동맹 수준에 비하면은 아직 못 미친다고 얘기하는데 정말 상대방이 서로 받아들일 만한 비용 분담, 부담 분담의 범위는 어떤 것인가? 그 다음에 만약에 지금 필연적으로 전반적인 전 세계적인 미군 재편 과정에서 이것이 불가피하다면 어느 정도의 유연한 주한미군 역할이 서로 억셉터블한 것인가에 대한 논의도 이루어질 것이고요. 그 다음에 확장 억제를 포함해서 각종 대량 살상 무기 위협에 이건 뭐 한국의 대량 살상 무기 위협을 이 방어해 주는 것뿐만 아니라 한국을 위해서 반면으로 한국이 또 어떤 노력을 해줄 것인가에 대한 이 논의도 본격적으로 이루어져야 될 거라고 생각을 하고요. 또 결국은 2000년대 초반에 나타났던 뭐 물론 일시적인 경향이기는 했습니다만은 동맹 문제에 대한 양측의 어떤 편견이나 부정적인 시각을 방지하기 위한 제도적인 차원의 노력들, 환경 문제라든가 아니면은 이 주둔군 지휘협정, 소파와 같은 문제의 개정에 대해서도 양측이 보다 열린 자세로의 접근이 필요한 시간인가 생각을 합니다. 좀 길어졌습니다. 죄송합니다.
I would like to begin by thanking the City of Pyeongtaek and Mayor Kim for sponsoring this event and also for recognizing that they are in essence, future strategic key terrain for the alliance. I'd also like to say I appreciate the opportunity to participate and appreciate the growing relationship between this command and the Center for New American Security and the East Asia Institute. Improving that relationship, expanding it, has not only been my own priority and that of my deputy, Mr. Brian Port, but also of General Sharp personally. Now, General Sharp will be speaking at tonight's event, showing his emphasis of how important he believes this event is. Next slide, please. Now, General Sharp's comments this evening will be in his official capacity. However, the opinions I expressed during this presentation do not necessarily represent the policy or positions of Combined Forces Command, U.S. Forces Korea, or any ROC or U.S. government agency. Due to the security constraints, of course, there will be certain details that I won't be able to go into in this forum. That having been said, I would like to point out that I am here not just in my capacity in United States Forces Korea as introduced, but also as Chief of Strategy for Combined Forces Command, in understanding that I am trying to portray this not just from a U.S. perspective, but also from a Korean perspective as well. I've worked at the Combined Forces Command headquarters now for 8 years, and much of the work that I do involves trying to match the Korean and American perspectives on issues. In essence, to produce documents that say the same thing, not just in terms of words, but in terms of meaning between the Hangul and the English. We have in the headquarters now a profusion of plasma screens, and they're usually paired side by side. And that's not like because we like seeing the same thing twice. It's because it's that important to the leadership and really to all of us to make sure that we're saying the same thing in both languages so we have that common understanding. Just briefly, my agenda today will be really interrelated in many ways with many of the presentations we've seen before. And actually, I have to be very thankful going last. A lot of the background that I would normally have to provide has already been provided by the illustrious presentations that have gone before me. I'll begin by analyzing and summarizing the overall challenge we face in terms of transforming the alliance. We'll talk a little bit about what we have done so far in terms of some key documents and milestones, talk about what remains to be done, and then I'll give you my personal view of what I think a transformed alliance should look like, and really how would we get there. Now, first of all, we use the terms management and transformation very deliberately. And it's because of the fact that we have to balance this immediate management of the crises, the threats that we deal with every day, with this long-term transformation. And the challenge that we face, because of the nature of the North Korean threat, and because of the nature of really the complex, fast-paced world that we live in right now, is that really 90% of our time or more at the headquarters and really in the leadership circles of the alliance are focused on managing these near-term crises, near-term friction, and near-term threats. And so we have only a limited amount of time to be able to focus on transformation, on making long-term improvements. We really have to manage with what we have, and that transformation that we want to make to get to where we want to be oftentimes doesn't receive the amount of time and energy that it really should, just because of the nature, again, of the environment that we're faced with. But transformation, make no mistake, is absolutely critical. Because it is only through changing how we do business as an alliance from the tactical all the way up to the strategic level, and using that to change the environment on the peninsula, in the region, in the world, that we truly will be able to make progress in dealing with those problems that right now we are merely managing. Now, I want to emphasize here that the number one issue, of course, that we manage from a day-to-day basis is the threat from North Korea. But within that, and I think as you've heard in several of the presentations today, there's a primary focus within that overall focus on North Korea on deterring and preparing for a full-scale North Korean attack. And that focus, of course, requires a tremendous amount of defense resources. It requires a tremendous amount of attention and energy. And it will continue to require a degree of focus and energy. But however, unfortunately, in some ways, has it robbed us of the ability to focus on longer-term transformation, and also, of course, to focus on the full range, the full spectrum of threats that North Korea poses. Now, when we talk about transforming the alliance and transforming capabilities to meet future threats, I think we need to be careful. Right now, the future threat is here. It has been proven. I question the idea that we did not anticipate these North Korean capabilities or these North Korean actions. I will tell you, I personally saw a congressional testimony from commanders of Combined Forces Command that emphasized the capability of North Korea with very little warning to execute asymmetric strikes, to use limited amounts of military force in pursuit of its objectives. It is frankly to me almost more surprising that North Korea has not chosen this route that it's chosen this year earlier. And so in that way, we have to recognize that the threats posed by North Korea are not simply the full-scale attack or the instability that we seem to be focusing on. It is a global threat and a global challenge. And so when we talk about working together as a global alliance, we have to recognize that the first place where we start that is viewing North Korea as a global threat. North Korea has a global illicit network. North Korea participates in proliferation, passing in both directions, of missile and nuclear weapons technology around the world. That's already out there. That's open source. You can read that in the newspapers. And that's been acknowledged in testimony both in the National Assembly and the United States Congress. And so our alliance cannot have a peninsular focus by nature. If it is focused on North Korea and not simply on deterring an attack or preparing for war with North Korea, if it's focused on truly dealing with the challenge posed by North Korea, it must be global. And so we have to take steps to transform to become a truly global alliance. Now, looking at alliance transformation, as we move forward, there are really two key documents right now that we have as our roadmap for transformation. The first one is the joint vision for the alliance that was signed in the summer of, or was presented in the summer of 2009, and that is really, as some of the presenters have already pointed out, a vision, perhaps a destination in many ways, one that is not precise in its language, that does not lay out an action plan for how we get there. Then we have the Strategic Alliance 2015, which is a much more precise document, but it is much more limited in terms of what it approaches. Of course, it only goes out to 2015, and in strategic terms, that's a relatively short period of time. And it is primarily focused on defense and security issues, and it does not address really the full range of all of the things that are within the joint vision for the alliance, although it addresses a good number of them. Now, I'm not going to go into detail on what's in the joint vision statement, but what I would say is it's very important that we review this document and really look at it when we have these discussions, there's a lot of talk of here's the joint vision statement. But as far as really absorbing what is in that document, what was agreed to, and what was discussed, I think a lot of times he gloss over some of the key points, and I'll hit on a few of them later. But the statement itself really is such a powerful tool right now that if we can build on that joint vision statement, if we can develop answers to some of those unresolved questions of how we get to what is in that joint vision, I think we will go a long way to transforming the alliance and really transforming the environment in which the alliance operates to be in great support of the interests of both Iraq and the United States. Now, Strategic Alliance 2015, I know is not fully understood by everyone in this room, and part of what we are doing as we move forward is communicating what Strategic Alliance 2015 is and what its real value is to the Iraq-U.S. alliance. The essence of Strategic Alliance 2015 is to synchronize a wide range of alliance initiatives through 2015, and as part of that, there comes a comprehensive implementation plan and monitoring plan to keep those initiatives on track. Now, the initiative, of course, that's most often highlighted there is the transition of wartime operational control of Iraq forces in 2015. Another key element, of course, is the planning aspect, planning for a wide range of contingencies and threats that may come from North Korea. And then there's a lot of enabling elements that come to that in terms of organizational structures, training, acquisition, and these sorts of things. But the more strategic element, beyond just dealing with the operational situation on the peninsula and dealing with the immediate threats from North Korea, is also to posture the alliance over the long term to resolve certain friction points and to be able to posture the U.S. element of the forces of the alliance to be really better positioned for the long term, including in two enduring hubs on the peninsula, consolidated, and then also then over time setting the conditions for forces to be able to deploy from the peninsula side by side, Iraq and U.S., dealing with global challenges and issues. Another key element, of course, that comes with that is the reassurances to the Republic of Korea that any such deployments that come are going to be within the alliance structure, and they're going to be, as far as consultation, and reassurances that that this is not going to undermine the defense of the Republic of Korea, that any of those actions are going to be within the consideration of the security requirements of the Republic of Korea. Now, to go back to the joint vision statement, there's a key element within the joint vision statement that's often glossed over that I want to emphasize here, and that is the alliance vision of unification. You see there the blue words that are highlighted on the slide. The idea that unification is a fundamental objective of the alliance is one that is often glossed over in discussions. And particularly, we're not just talking about unification, we're talking here specifically about peaceful reunification on the principles of free democracy and a market economy. That is really a stated objective of both the Iraq and U.S. presidents. But based on that vision, what have we done to actually advance that particular objective? What have we done to enshrine that objective as a primary element of the alliance? And so I believe we have an obligation to consider how the alliance as a whole shapes the conditions for reunification, how it supports the process of reunification as it's ongoing, how our alliance can establish and maintain a secure post-unification environment after the reunification of the peninsula. Now, there's a military element to each one of those things. And so that requires attention, it requires thought. And that is going to require a adjustment of priority when you think about it, is that not just dealing with what do we do in a situation where North Korea attacks or North Korea initiates aggression, but what do we do on a daily basis that helps shape the conditions for peaceful unification? How do we not only deter North Korea from doing things, but how do we get the North Korean people and the North Korean elite to come to a place where unification is possible? That's something that we have to devote a certain amount of time and intellectual energy and effort to. And even though the North Korean threat is immediate, and we have to manage that threat, we have to deter against it, we have to be prepared to defeat it. We have to do something to transform the conditions on the peninsula, not just transform the alliance itself, in order to be able to answer those three questions and achieve this vision that we have in the alliance of peaceful reunification on the principles of free democracy and a market economy. And so, what does the transformed alliance look like that gets us to this point where we can actually use the transformed alliance to actually transform the environment around us? And the first step in that process, of course, the first aspect is the fact that we really have to come to the point where we all view this alliance as a global and a regional alliance. That it has the capabilities and the processes and the policies that enable the alliance to tackle North Korea as a global, complex problem. The illicit networks of North Korea, the connections that North Korea has in the world, the entire package of problems that North Korea poses to the region, comprehensively addressed side by side within the alliance. That is a critical element of transforming the peninsula regional environment and positioning the alliance really for the long-term future. Another key element of that is the integration and the building of connections between the two partners in the alliance with other partners that share similar values and similar interests and deal with the same challenges. Now, I'm not proposing that the Iraq-U.S. alliance become the core of some kind of new alliance construct, but it has to be within the existing constructs of, for example, the United Nations, agreements like the Proliferation Security Initiative. And it has to be recognized that part of that is going to require a change in thinking, where it's not always just ROC and U.S. It's ROC and U.S. and a key element of this, of course, is the United Nations Command structure that we have, where General Sharp, of course, wears an additional hat as the commander of United Nations Command, and so that's a powerful vehicle that the alliance can use as one avenue to be able to partner with other countries that share these interests in the region and globally, without diluting the alliance, but simply adding the value of the fact that the ROC and U.S., for example, don't have to sit down separately necessarily on every occasion with these other countries that share those interests, as they can sit down together to deal with the North Korea issue with these other countries, providing additional support and additional capability to the alliance. Now, the next step, of course, the next aspect is, as part of this, is the alliance has to be enduring and future-focused. The alliance cannot be simply based on dealing with the immediate North Korean threat. It has to be based, as some of the speakers alluded earlier, on a shared understanding of what are the things that binds the alliance together beyond North Korea, and what is the role, really, of this alliance after unification, after there is no longer a North Korea. And so it's the elements like building the connections between the local communities and where U.S. bases are that are an element of building this enduring alliance that's all the way from the grassroots level of personal relationships between, in this example, between the family members, U.S. service members, and the people living in the local community in Pyeongtaek. That has got to be a part of the transformation of the alliance to place greater emphasis on that and to enable that. Another key element is the need to have an interagency and whole of government approach for everything that we do in the alliance. We have to be able to synchronize all our elements of power. We have to have the capability to use the strengths and weaknesses, or I should say the varying strengths of Iraq and U.S. in terms of soft power and hard power in close concert. And we have to recognize that even though dealing with North Korea on a hard power basis has got to be one aspect of our strategy, strategy, that long-term unification, which will ultimately resolve the security threat from North Korea, is really in many ways a soft power problem more than a hard power problem. And if we use our hard power to deal with North Korea in the short term in ways that undermine our soft power in the long term, this will be to the detriment of the alliance. So it's important that as we transform, we have the same ability to coordinate and synchronize the alliance use of soft power as the alliance use of hard power. Now, on the question of agility and flexibility, obviously, that's a huge element of being able to deal with this wide range of threats from North Korea to achieve this idea, as alluded earlier, of full spectrum dominance. To be able to deal with North Korea in any given situation from a position where we're not behind the power curve, we can quickly deal with whatever challenge they pose, and that requires an approach that all the way from, again, the bottom to the top level, that has close coordination on a daily basis, and that allows us to be able to use, again, that interagency and whole and government approach to the problem sets as they're emerging instead of reacting. And then lastly, to enable all of this, we need to be a transparent and communicative alliance. There has to be, at each level, and particularly starting with the intergovernmental level, the maximum amount of transparency. And then as the alliance comes to positions on the issues and the challenges that it deals with, and has a common voice on issues of shared concern, then this is communicated to domestic audiences effectively, and it's communicated internationally. So there's no question about where the alliance stands on a particular issue, and the fact that the ROC and the U.S. stand together. And so this question of reassuring the Korean people to correct gaps in perception, to overcome myths, that's really very important to be able to achieve all these other aspects of the transformation of the alliance. If we're not communicating at the ground level to the typical American and the typical South Korean about where we're going with the alliance and why, these initiatives may not have the domestic support that they need over the long term to succeed. And so even if the ROC and U.S. governments agree at any given time, if there's not the support from the people of the ROC and the United States to go in a particular direction, because they don't know which direction they're going, or I should say where we're planning on going, then any transformation effort is doomed to fail. So that's a key final element. So I'd like to close here by saying then, within this overall construct of a ROC-U.S. alliance that's global, that's strategic, that is moving toward this joint vision, there's really three key elements of how the military alliance fits in with that. First of all, the military alliance in the future has to be capable of dealing with a wider range of challenges, not only on the peninsula, but regionally and globally. And we are moving in that direction. Under Strategic Alliance 2015, we're definitely moving in that direction. But we'll have to continue that progress after 2015 and not get pulled back into looking at a historical or legacy view of the threats and the challenges that we face. The second element is that the military element of the alliance should, in essence, work itself out of a job. It should become a foundational element between a larger, expanded global strategic alliance, rather than see itself always as the primary or the most important element within the alliance. And really, the concern that I have is because the linkage between the ROC and U.S. military is so strong, and because the Mutual Defense Treaty is the cornerstone of the alliance, that we have to be careful that it doesn't turn from a cornerstone into a stumbling block and prevent us from really moving further. And that's absolutely critical. And then lastly, and I can't emphasize this enough, is that the military element of the alliance has to be focused on not just dealing with threats from North Korea, but on shaping conditions for unification as part of its daily thought process, on supporting unification as it would happen in a variety of scenarios, hopefully in a very peaceful scenario. What is the role of the military alliance? How is it prepared to function and support that process? And then lastly, everything we do from procurement to planning to strategic communication has to be designed to support an alliance, a military alliance that is going to last beyond Korean reunification and is not just about the North Korean threat. One last point I would like to make about these three elements is that it's going to require more than just the ROC and U.S. militaries addressing these issues to achieve it. It's forums like this, discussions that take place outside of the military and outside of the government that are going to have a tremendous positive impact on the ability of the military element of the alliance to do these things and to address these issues. Thank you.